Welcome, Jaden Bales. Welcome back.
Hey, thanks, Jeff. I think I am turning into your, am I your Wyoming guinea pig or something?
Well, I was going to say that I don't even bother counting how many times you've been on this because it's more like you're a staple, right? You're a fixture of the podcast. But I think you're the, I wouldn't say guinea pig. I'd say maybe correspondent. That's a little bit more of a dignified title.
I like that. Your Wyoming correspondent.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, thanks for having me on again, man. I was thinking about this too. Like, no matter if we pressed record or not, this is a conversation that I think I'd call and have with you anyway. So
Yeah.
Somebody else can learn something from it. That's great.
Exactly. So for the listeners, I floated the idea because Jaden is the marketing director and communications. Is it marketing and communications, that one title?
Yeah, it's one person. So,
okay.
Yeah.
For the Wyoming Wildlife Federation in Lander, worked for the Cody Rich Outdoors or the Rich Outdoors, Cody Rich, and did the Backcountry Fuel Box. Does the Mule Monday podcast on occasion, or you're pretty consistent on it now, aren't you?
Yep. Every other week I do the Muley Mondays.
Wait. So he has a wealth of knowledge in the Wyoming area, and I put in for an elk tag, didn't draw it, put in for a mule deer tag. Hopefully we'll draw it next week, and so I have a lot of questions, and I figure he's a good guy. Not only is he willing to be on the podcast, but he's pretty much run out of systems to organize his OnX, which is great. And all those texts are totally confidential, so I got to be a good steward of that.
Yeah.
So I asked him, I've been doing some e-scouting on OnX and on Google Earth, and I came up with 3 spots that I want him to critique. So I sent him those 3 spots last night. So we're going to go through them one by one. Not going to tell where they are, what unit or anything, but I'm trying to describe the types of things I was looking for in these spots. And then Jaden will be looking at the spot and then critiquing whether or not it was I was correct in that or not. So we'll see how this goes. This will be an exercise in making sure that I am describing things well. I'm trying to share what is this? No, well, I guess I can't share the screen, which doesn't matter because you have it in front of you anyway. So perfect. Yeah, so you have it in front of you, and listeners can't hear it, but that's fine.
I think it is also notable that I have spent a little bit of time in this area, like scouting and hunting deer too. So hopefully, it's not just me kind of like thinking about what a place should look like, but I have some on the ground knowledge there, and that will be helpful. I would hope.
Excellent. Good. All right. So area number 1, I have heard this is for October 15th-ish, mid-month mule deer hunting. So I've been listening and I've heard a lot about pockets, and so don't overlook pockets. So this is a relatively small 4-mile perimeter space. It has some west-northwest facing slopes. There's a lot of texture for stalks, but it's not totally open. There's some the hills are kind of barren, but looks like there might be some of the right type of shrubbery. There's a creek at the bottom. It's at about, varies from 6,700 up to 7,000 feet in elevation. So based on those things, the size, the facing of the vegetation, the texture, the elevation, how did I do in this first one, this part 1?
So I've about hit a deer on this corner of the highway. They're there, right? Like this is a really good pin. One thing that is notable, like you were saying, it's like, it's what we call a section, it's 640 acres is what makes up this square, which is not in the mule deer hunting realm. That's like not a very big parcel. And I know kind of from like local knowledge, this is some background information here that gives me more than what you'd find out just on the computer. I know that guys have sat there and they've shot elk there and like caught elk moving through there, and deer have been pulled off this piece before. So I can tell you what definitively this is a good one.
Nice.
I actually was hoping that you were going to tell me you were going to archery hunt this spot in particular, though, because it is such a small piece that if you run into other folks on there, there's pretty slim chance that there's going to be other critters on that piece at the same time as you guys, just because it can, any more than one or two sets of boot tracks across this parcel at one time, and you're going to blow those critters out.
Yeah.
So, but when you look, go ahead.
The paranoid thing growing up in Southeast Alaska, now hunting Southeast Alaska, is that there's so much space. And so if you do happen to see a truck at this pullout, you can go to the next one. There's just so much territory. Confining a hunt to such a small area really made me feel that, gosh, if there's anybody else, then it could be trouble. When you talk about, maybe two sets of boots, blown stuff out, how long would it take someone to or something to re-enter the spot? It's blown out in the day? Is it done for 24 hours? Is it, come back never? What's the recovery rate for getting the population back in there?
I would say that you need to analyze what has happened or how many people have been in there or whatever. This pullout right here, I know it really only fits like one or two vehicles, right?
Okay.
So it's just not going to be, if there's two vehicles there, I wouldn't go in there, and I would wait for probably at least 24 hours before I tried it again. That said, if there's a bunch of snow happening in this time of year, and animals are kind of moving around quite a bit, I would consider going back in there anyway if there are people there, and or I would go in there anyway if you had like 12 hours between. So if you drive by in the evening and you see trucks there, I would still go there the next morning.
Okay.
So that's and another factor that you pointed out is like there's a ton of folds in this country. Once you have boots on the ground, you'll know that there's a bunch of cliff lines and like some boulders in this area. So it's difficult for one hunter or even two hunters to like cover each individual pocket.
Right.
So that's why I think, you can get back in there pretty quickly. So even if you have a hunter blow something out or a hunter comes by and everything holds up real tight, you can get back in there. It is, like I said, it would probably be, oh, actually I wrote this down on I didn't tell you yet, but I wrote it down on my Onyx pin. This would be an area where I would absolutely do like a half day. Just because I think you can cover this in all of the areas where you can cover this whole 640 with a set of binoculars in an evening or a morning session of glassing. Okay. I think the way you chose it, though, is in this country, it's really dry. Having a creek down the center of it with good forage, money. Having good cover in those boulders and cliffs up above it, money. Having a lot of elevation contour, even though it's not like one giant wall, it's got a bunch of fingers and crevices. I think that also is money. It is going to be a little bit more difficult to check each one of them in a shorter time span. But I don't think that should be your goal either. Your goal should really be focusing on being in a prime glassing spot of this creek where you have the best vegetation in the morning before daylight, or in the last 2, 3, 4 hours of dark.
Nice.
Before dark. Yeah.
Excellent. What else you got on that? On option A?
One of the things is, you look at this thing, and I've had this conversation a lot with different folks trying to find like a standardized way to pick a glassing spot, because especially without having put boots on the ground yet, it's difficult to understand what the high point is that's going to give you the best vantage point. Mm-hmm. Something that I would consider is if you're there real dang early in the morning and it's opening day of rifle season or something, and you might expect company, I would go get in there and get to the back corner of this. As far as folks who aren't viewing this is concerned, in the southern end of this section, there's a high point back there that really stands out to me as a really good glassing spot. And it would be a place where you could look into some fingers away from the highway, where guys walking from the highway into this section might push deer.
Mm-hmm. Good.
So As far as a glassing point is concerned, man, it is like you are going to probably, unless you want to cross the creek first thing. I don't know if I would do that though. So you're looking at, I'm running my little Onyx deal. You're looking at like a half mile to that glassing spot, which isn't too dang far. But I would get there early, or else you might find somebody in your place.
Yeah. Sweet. So. Excellent. Good. Excited about that. I like that.
Yeah. I will say though, the size of this piece makes me not want it to be your recommended first spot. It'd be a good second choice.
But it was number one just based in by chance. It wasn't like the number one spot that I want to check out. But
cool.
It is, and without giving too much away, it's kind of on the way to, based on what I put in for, on the way to something else. And so that half day thing sounds pretty nice to be able to give this a good check. And that was one of the main questions I had. How long would you spend at a place like this? At this, got to give it a whole day, or is it a couple hours? But that half day, check the early morning and see what's going on there, then move on is good.
After years of fine print contracts and getting ripped off by big wireless providers, if we've learned anything, it's that there's always a catch. So when I first heard that Mint Mobile offers premium wireless starting at just $15 a month, I thought, what's the catch? But after talking to them and using their service, it all made sense. There isn't one. Mint Mobile's secret sauce is that they're the first company to sell wireless service online only. They cut out the cost of retail stores and pass those sweet savings directly to you. For anyone who hates their phone bill, Mint Mobile offers premium wireless for just $15 a month. I was hesitant about having to get a new phone and a new phone number, but with Mint, you can use your own phone with any Mint Mobile plan and keep your same phone and your same phone number along with all of your existing contacts. Mint Mobile gives you the best rate whether you're buying for one or for a family, and at Mint, families start at 2 lines. All plans come with unlimited talk and text plus high-speed data delivered on the nation's largest 5G network. Switch to Mint Mobile and get premium wireless service starting at just $15 a month. To get your new wireless plan for just $15 a month and to get the plan shipped to your door for free, go to mintmobile.com/waypoint. That is mintmobile.com/waypoint. Cut your wireless bill to $15 a month at mintmobile.com/waypoint.
Yeah, and the other thing is, like, especially if you're planning on hunting opening day, one of the things that you should consider is being out there, and this is a section you could glass or you could scout, and if there's something there the day before opening day or 2 days before opening day, you can go in there pretty confidently and know you can turn that thing up just because there's not a whole lot of cover.
Yeah. Okay. Excellent.
Good pin, right, man. That was good.
Good. Well, I kind of cheated a little bit because Abby's been to a kind of a similar area and said she'd seen deer. So
that's okay.
Yeah. Okay. Spot number 2. Let me get my Onyx up here. I'm using there's like a separate little app thing. And so it's not like on the screen. So I can't share the screen. I'm staring at the Onyx, but we got the screen. All right, anyway. So, all right. Number 2. Which one?
So number 2.
All right. No. So I chose this, and this is kind of a 2-part thing. I think I sent you the access point. It's off a road, and then there's a little bit of a gulch, which I thought would provide cover. Mm-hmm. And then that's the access point is about 6,200 feet, and there's a high point in between at about 7,000 feet. And it leads to, there's a spring. It's about a mile and a half from the access point to the spring. In where the spring is obviously a low point, a little bit of a basin. It's a lot more foliage, a lot more vegetation going on there than spot number 1. A lot rockier, but there again a lot of texture, things like that. So
there's a draw that goes to the northwest from where you're looking, right?
Yeah.
From where the access pin is. my comments on it, I didn't know that you were planning on going deeper. My comments on it were to go deeper and go up into that, stay on top of that drainage, and get to a place where you can glass up above it. And a little further in there, it definitely there's like all these pockets of timber as well as the rocks. If
Yeah.
you can get on top of a rock where you can see down into the timber a little bit better, that's going to be key. The only downside of this is that you could get into an area where you have too much timber and not be able to glass very effectively.
Okay.
It's to not be able to look down into the depressions where the good feed and stuff is. So definitely consider, like, when you go to this spot, try to get higher. Which it sounds like that was what your plan was.
Yeah.
But that's a great spot. That is the spot I have pinned. I put that pin there on April 2nd, 2019.
Wait,
Go hunt there myself.
You didn't like share that one with me, did you?
No, I didn't. That one was not one I shared with you.
That's that'd be definitely cheating. Yeah, that was the first one was kind of an obvious. The access point is the area. So this one, I just shared the one point, which is the access, and I figured from there doing work to get back there. But even the way out there, there's that little gulch to the northeast that it seems like as you're working to get to the high point to glass down that draw, then you could also be looking down that way. So
Totally.
At what point do you go from enough cover for them to survive versus too much cover potentially like this?
I wouldn't say this is too much cover. This is definitely right in between, especially for October. So in October, like your bucks are going to be holed up in the like thickest kind of cover for the most of the day, the daylight hours. This is probably a good mix. So it's going to be difficult to turn them up. There's no doubt about it. But if there's an area, you want it to be somewhere in between so that you give yourself a chance to catch something moving through an opening or to catch something up on his feet feeding out in an open. This is pretty good. When you see like just a sea of vegetation or a sea of trees, then it gets difficult. And I think this is like, especially for what you're looking for, this is good. So what I call that when you go, folks aren't seeing this, but basically this access point that he's looking at, it's like you go through state land, which oftentimes looks like private because there's cows and stuff on it. You go through state land by walking, and then you like take a jog and you have to like watch your GPS to make sure you don't cross onto private. And then you get back in there a little ways. And I call that a hustle move. Those hustle moves, I think, are one of the best ways to get away from folks in these kinds of areas where you have a lot of private public boundaries like that.
Mm-hmm. Excellent. Good. This is, again, with my limited knowledge, actually, I'm going to ask that in a second there. Let's get through those first three, and then I have some kind of general questions that have to do with elk and deer habitat and how they might overlap during certain times of the year or not.
Okay.
When does the resident elk come out? Isn't that coming out soon?
Yeah, it comes out on the 18th, the same day that all of the non-residents do for deer and antelope. Yep.
In the back of my mind is if Abby draws an elk tag in the same area, then would there be an opportunity for us to overlap? But we'll go through part 3 here, and then we can talk about overlapping and how you figure that stuff out. So part 3 is
one more comment. Sorry to interrupt you, but one more comment on this spot that I just noticed is that, so like we're looking at this one point and being like, man, this one drainage looks pretty good. And then when you back out of that, you see that there's a trail that is motorized that is up on the top hillside. There's a mountain right there with like a lookout tower on Onyx. Those are like, especially for probably like your local guys running around on ATVs or side-by-sides, like those are that kind of a vantage point is going to be pretty popular. Mm-hmm. And I would expect them to push deer down towards where you walked in. Okay. So that is something else to consider when you're looking at these bigger chunks of private land, is like, where is the pressure coming into this area and where are they going to be moving critters to? And I think that the place that you went in is a place that they're going to move critters to. I would spend like a whole day in that drainage probably.
Okay, good. Yeah, that was going to be the final question there is how much time you'd spend there. Yeah, that's in the back of my brain. There's just going to be tons of people, and so I'm thinking about, where they would push to, and if I can be on the receiving end of that. Used to doing a lot of like that hiking and getting up into the areas, and not much of a road hunter. So I've done it before, but that just kind of sip coffee and listen to the country music as you drive around. It's not really, the go-to, but
dude, that's how I was raised, and we didn't kill anything either. So I think there's a correlation.
Well, there's a huge, it's what are your goals? If you just want to go out and you just want to be in nature, and if you're okay with a camping trip, then that's fine. If you really want to get after it, then it's you can't begrudge anybody, and that's however hard you want to take it, and that's fine. Whatever your expectations are, just don't be surprised if your expectations don't match. Driving around and you're just hoping to get a 4-point buck in Southeast Alaska, it's probably not going to happen. So, if you drive around and get a buck, then that's a great day.
Yeah, no, that's exactly right. One of the things I don't know if you've noticed this, but I keep trying to say one of the names of these places, and they're the most generic names. But I realize if you put them all together, that wouldn't be so generic.
Yeah. There are a couple of times I want to give direction to you to put you switch. That's why I wanted to send you the links in above time. That way you could, or above time, ahead of time, that you could get a look on what's going on here.
Yeah.
So
Ready
number
for three?
3, I marked the actual glassing point I was thinking about, which is a high point on a rock. I didn't give you the access point, which I did for number 2. So you might be able to see the access point as you were looking at this, how you get to this spot. But as far as the glassing point, I chose this. It's a high point. It's about 7,000 feet. Lots of rocks, similar to the previous one. It doesn't look quite as, it looks more like it's at a top, and it all kind of filters down to this like basin area where there's some dense foliage and whatnot, pretty broken up getting down there. So not quite as easy, a little bit more extreme, but I like the high point there to be able to glass these areas. And there's that rock face to the west that looks pretty open, but there's still a lot of texture.
Yeah.
So similar, but what's different?
So this area in particular, I'm nervous about it being too flat for the type of country it is. And I know, if you're looking at 200-foot elevation changes here, that you're going to be like, are you sure that's flat? But one of the things that is easy, you're looking at on this map is, like you said, there's a lot of timber, which is fine, especially in this season, but you're going to want to be up higher so that you can look down into it instead of, closer to the same level. The other thing is that area that doesn't have much timber, that basin you were talking about, man, it looks really good. And it is flat enough, though, that it would be hard if you spotted something. In order to be high enough to glass something down there, you'd have to go get into its bedroom to actually shoot it. Yeah. Because if you're up there glassing at kind of the place that you looked at or whatever, you're talking about probably a half mile from where 1 mile is from the center of that basin, which is good for glassing. But in order to put a move on something, it would be hard to get into like that 200 yard range, like without really without being able to relocate it, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
It is good though. I like that basin that you chose there. And one thing to consider as well is, like, you do off to the east here, there's a bunch of road systems, and kind of looks like some place that you could drive motorcycles and 4-wheelers and stuff. And this would probably be a great drainage to sit right at first light, and maybe someone would bump something through to you. Okay. As well as being able to pick up something that's feeding right there just without getting bumped. But it is definitely something to consider. The other thing is there is a house. It's really hard to tell, but if you bring up the super high resolution, there is a house right on the edge of that private land.
Just to the south. Yeah.
Just to the south. It's like 350, 400 yards away. And I just personally usually try to bump another drainage over from those places.
Makes sense.
Probably don't need to technically. It just has always been something that I do. I was explaining this yesterday. I was looking at some deer outside of town, and I was like, man, I kind of it's weird to think you could rifle hunt here because there's houses
Mm-hmm.
all around. But um, anyway, maybe it's a personal thing, but it would be something I would consider is bumping to the other side of that big drainage
Okay.
up on the mountain that's got a title.
Yes, perfect. Excellent. Good. All right. So when I first was looking at these, I was hoping to draw archery elk or the reduced cow calf tags, but I did not. So now I'm looking at the same areas and wondering, okay, well, if it does get pretty stinking hot there during the summer, is this a coexist type place for mule deer, or how do these areas stack up to archery versus rifle, and then elk, mule deer?
So in archery season for mule deer, very specifically, this is the one that I've spent some time in here, so I feel a little bit more confidently talking about. Archery season for mule deer, those mule deer are a lot more visible, and especially when you talk about that first section that doesn't have a whole bunch of timber on it, like those places you can still pick up deer, and you can pick them up kind of, being lazy or trying to just eat a bunch of food. And then as you get later into the season, as they shed their velvet and stuff, then they start hiding a little bit more in the thicker cover. So, as the season goes, the thicker cover is, like I said, a little bit more attractive, but at the same time, it's harder to hunt. And that's why they give out so many tags. And it's a general area for residents, and they're trying to basically give you dates that give you opportunity without really laying waste to these deer.
Mm-hmm.
Which that's a whole different discussion. But one thing to consider is that these dates are October 15 to 31. That opening day is going to be, I don't know how much flexibility you have with your schedule, but that opening day is usually pretty good, especially if you get a day or two prior to go scout and find some deer. Then it's kind of like playing the weather, man. As good weather moves, when I say good weather, I mean like snowstorms roll in, you're going to get more deer movement when it's colder out, and they're going to be on their feet longer, feeding just to try to make sure they get the calories they need. And on top of that, the highest reaches of this area, those deer do migrate down because there's quite a bit of snow. So you're going to just get generally more deer movement. For elk in this area, it's kind of interesting to know, like, the management of this area is such that they try to have really good bull elk hunting, but they give out a ton of cow tags because they want to keep this herd like in check. They have a lot of private land around here where the private landowners are like, man, these elk are eating me out of house and home. So they're trying to keep the herd at lower numbers, but the elk herd is doing super, super well. I would say, like, because of this factor, that elk herd is doing extremely well in this area, you're going to find a lot of elk in the same places that you're looking for deer. And in a place where maybe it was general for deer and elk, you might not have as much interface. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I was curious about the overlapping thing. Like, I'm sure they weren't like hanging out with each other, but how far is the migration? So if there's that mountain that's going to be unnamed, do they
biggest
come
one,
down
the biggest
off the mountain, or do they go way, way down? Are they staying in the same vicinity, or what is the migration?
So in particular, the highest peak there is over 10,000 feet. The deer and elk are going to come off of that, but only come off to probably the 7,000-ish foot level, where the windswept ridges are going to stay clear of snow, but there's still going to be a bunch of snow off the edges. I got stuck in my truck out here in like April. Yeah, end of April, because I was trying to go turkey hunting. And and it was because I was just mobbing along at a normal, 40-mile-an-hour gravel road speed, and then the roll fell away, and there was a big drift on the other side. So this area gets a ton of snow that drifts up.
Yeah.
Your critters aren't going to go more than 10 or 15 miles down the mountain, and that's at the highest, from the very highest point. They're not going to travel. It's not like some historic migration route. They're just going to bump down the hill, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Gotcha. So of these 3 spots, because you said the first one could be elky. As
The
far as
people catch elk traveling through there. The elk aren't going to hang out there as
yeah,
much as you
okay,
would find on the second spot.
okay. So give me a archery elk grade 1, 2, 3. Which one is the best spot? And then we'll go October rifle elk 1, 2, 3, and then mule deer archery, mule deer rifle. Or are they all going to end up being kind of the same as far as ranking?
They're not going to be the same. Your number 3 spot, number 3 is going to be my first choice archery elk spot. That has a ton of vegetation, a ton of cover, and it is a place where you're going to find a lot of cow elk hanging out, and because it has such good food and water resources, you're eventually going to get bulls moving in there in September.
Okay.
And it's not super steep. That's another reason why like those cows really like that spot. It's not terribly rugged terrain. At least by this area's standards. Then I would go to number 2, just like your number 2 spot would be my number 2 choice for elk hunting for similar reasons. It is a little bit more rugged, so you're probably not going to get as high of cow numbers in there, but I'd imagine you're going to find, within all of the undulations, you're going to find elk in there.
Mm-hmm.
There's good water, there's good feed. It's just not as much as the first spot.
Mm-hmm.
And then last spot is the one I was telling you, I'd expect elk to go through there eventually, but something to consider is when you look at this, when you look at your regulations map, the south side of the road of spot number 1 is in a general area for elk, and that general area goes until the end of November. So it's a great elk spot that late when everything is kind of bumped down and is trying to be on those exposed faces, but it would not be great for archery season.
Okay. And then what about rifle elk?
Work it back the other direction. I'd actually start it. Yeah, for rifle season, I'd honestly probably do the same thing for deer and elk. And then knowing that you're going to get there, you're going to find out more information about where you're finding critters and then make a game plan change, right? Like, so I'd start at your number 2 spot. That's a blend of, good visibility and thicker timber. And then I'd make a game call, whether you go towards more open terrain or go towards thicker cover from there. Rifle elk hunting is freaking hard, man. In that time frame, especially when there's no rut going on, they are in the thickest, nastiest, like steepest stuff that you can find for rifle elk season. So I would start at that steeper zone and expect that you have to go steeper than that to find a bull.
Okay.
I kind of alluded to it earlier, but that first spot, as far as mule deer go, that first spot that is more open and it's got some rocks and boulders and stuff, that'd be a great archery spot, man. That'd be like a stellar archery spot. And then this work it the same way backwards, right? Like you go as open as possible for that early archery, and then you go a little less open, and then you go to your thick spot. I would probably never even hunt that thicker spot for archery season, knowing that it'd be dang hard to put a stock on something. It's so, to get to sub 50 yards on that flat stuff is really hard.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And if it wasn't clear in rifle season, I would do the medium spot that's steeper and then make a game plan decision from there.
Okay. All right. Yeah. Well, I got the Jaden Bales guarantee then, right? So I just go to your number 1 spot, then I'll get a.
So
I'm hoping I don't jinx it because I bought an elk call or elk bugle. Are they called elk calls?
They're elk calls, yeah.
Because the elk bugles, but I don't know if the contraption that you use to replicate that is called a bugle itself. What is that?
Yeah,
called?
I call it a bugle tube. Okay. Yeah.
So I bought the bugle tube, and I bought some of the mouthpieces. Those are
mouth
calls,
reeds,
right?
Yeah,
calls. And then the day after those arrived in the mail, I did not get an elk tag. So I thought, perfect. So I've still been practicing anyway, and it just sounds awful, but it's kind of fun. So I'm hoping that by doing a podcast about mule deer just before the mule deer draw, it doesn't jinx me a second time. But who knows, man? I'm pretty good at the at losing sweepstakes and permits, tags, draws.
I know. I even told you, like, I was like, "Are you sure you don't want to wait until like next week when it comes out?"
Yeah.
But
Well,
it's all good.
we have this weekend open, and so I think maybe even tonight we're going to go out and we're going to camp somewhere. And so we want to just get the
Cool.
lay of the land. So if we're going to be out in the area, we might as well check it out and see. Don't bypass this spot because I don't think it's going to be good, and then do the podcast with you and find out, that was actually the spot to check out. So maybe check out the terrain because we have this first week open.
Oh no, that totally makes sense. I really hope you draw, and you really you should. You went in with 1 point, right?
I don't know, maybe.
Okay.
Who knows, right?
It's cool to see how it comes out. I'm excited. So one of the things is, since we're already like counting our eggs before they hatch, one of the things is when you get a deer in here, it is important to know like this area is really high in CWD prevalence, chronic wasting disease. Without giving away too much, it is not far from the area where the research site originally found CWD, like in the 60s or 70s. But so here's the caveat. I'll send you an article that I'm actually putting together for work, but people have been eating the CWD meat in this area for centuries. I don't condone it. It's not recommended scientifically to eat CWD meat, but if you do and you find out it's positive, you're probably okay. They've not found a link to humans yet. Mm-hmm. The other thing is, though, so from a human health perspective, you shouldn't worry. Secondarily, though, it would be good for you to take CWD samples and take them to the regional Fish and Game office, so that way they get better data on what the prevalence is like.
So that would be if I happen to take one, because I have to take it in somewhere anyway to get it officially done, right? Or
there's not a mandatory check. Is that what you mean?
So I put the tag on the antler, and then if I happen to be driving by a space or a spot in which there is a checkpoint, I must stop, right?
Yeah.
But if I'm on an area, if my path from where I took the deer back to home, there is no checkpoint, then I'm not required to check it.
Correct.
Which would then mean that it would be up to me to take a sample of the deer just in case, to somewhere where they could analyze it and then tell me whether or not it had chronic wasting.
Exactly. So I got an elk out of not that area in particular, but another nearby mountain range last year, and I took it to the checkpoint, turned in my lymph node samples, and like 3 days later they had a sample or had a test back for you. And it's one of those things, like, I started eating on it. I was like, I know it's not going to probably cause a health risk to me at this point. But I wasn't going to give that meat to the neighbor lady who has a daycare,
Yeah. Makes
until
sense.
I knew.
Yeah.
So anyway, yeah, that's good. That's good stuff. And anyone who hunts in a CWD area should be taking in those samples so they have better data.
Yeah.
It's really helpful.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Well, I'm still, I love learning the new stuff, and I just never thought that I would hunt down south. I never thought that I could get a tag or afford it. And I was listening to Corey Jacobson, one of his podcasts, and they were talking about point creep, and then how finding those good spots. And there are a couple spots I looked at that, oh man, I might be able to draw this, but the point totals are so low because it's mostly private. Like, or you're looking at a spot where there's a huge success rate. I'm like, oh dude, I got to check this out. And then it's like, oh, it's because it's all private. It's probably like guided type stuff. So yeah, finding that coming in late in the game, being able to, and I say late in the game because that point creep stuff that I'm learning about. And if I didn't start putting in 15 years ago, there's some spots that I'll never get.
Yep.
But finding those areas where you can hunt, and then, again, it's going to, I can't imagine spending all the money as an out-of-state or a non-resident going to a place and just kind of glassing from the car or truck and not really doing much about it. I mean, you have a chance, you drew the tag, you got to get after it. But
yeah. Oh, that's so true. I drew a Colorado tag this year. Drew it second choice. It's actually like related to the CWD conversation, it's an area where they're trying to knock down buck numbers because they're the highest carriers and they're the highest carriers, and they're the ones who spread the disease the most are these older age class bucks. So they increase tag numbers, and I was like, oh, put me in, coach. I can help.
Yeah.
But it's totally, I went down there just to drive around because it's like, if you're going to one of these new areas, it's freaking daunting to not know where you're going to go or where people might be and that kind of thing. And it was one of those things where I was like, okay, like we'll just drive into this camp area. There shouldn't be anyone here. And all the campsites were taken up by Coloradans. So I was like, this is going to be a trick when there's a season going on and there's reason for people to be out here, you know?
What's the recommendation of if you see a deer or any sort of antelope that's clearly been just ravaged by chronic wasting, do they encourage you to like report it, or is it like a mercy killing? You're burning your tag to mercy kill. I know Randy Newberg had he took out an antelope in I think it was Arizona or something like that. I was watching one of his episodes, and he took out an antelope because it wasn't the biggest type antelope, but it looked like it was suffering, and so he burned his tag on that. Which is, now if you're Randy Newberg, you could probably burn some tags, but what do they recommend doing, or can they recommend how you use your tag?
Man, I what was in particular from an ethical standpoint, I'd say shoot that thing if you can't. Like if you look at it and it's a buck that's just like has a hard, you can tell when something is that sick from like advanced stages of CWD. They're like having a hard time. Like they look really gaunt and they look like they're having a hard time getting enough food. That kind of thing. I would shoot it. I mean, personally, I would take it out.
Yeah.
I don't know if they reissue tags for CWD positive critters in Wyoming. It'd be something to check out, though. I know they do in Colorado, which is kind of interesting.
Yeah.
But
yeah, I think if you're going to do it, you should do it. Like if you're doing it just to hope that they reissue a tag that's kind of like, oh, I mercy killed this. Maybe it's a nice 4-point buck. And like, oh, this is a great buck for the wall, and I didn't have to take the meat, and I get reissued because I looked like a good guy for fish and game, or game and fish down here, right? Yeah.
Yeah, Fish and Game it's Wyoming Game and Fish Department, WGFD. Well, so actually, I have a friend of mine who had the elk tag the deer at the same time. And I'm trying to remember the exact order options, but he went into this area, shot an elk as he was like coming back in the next day to pack his elk out, saw a deer and shot a deer. It had both of his tags filled within like 12 hours.
Oh.
It is kind of it's a pretty, also I know where he was at and it was a ways back. So it took a while to pack all that meat out, but the area is pretty special. You should be excited.
Wow. Nice. Well, hopefully I will be excited.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That'll be good.
A secondary question I wanted to look at, because last year when we were down here hunting on Abby's tag, and where I had spotted looked like the right type of foliage or right type of vegetation, but it was different. And when you sent me, say, hey, this is what you're looking for, and it was like, I looked at turquoise bushes, but it was the green bushes that was the best thing to look at. So what's the difference? Is that like a sage brush versus buck brush, or what's the good brush and what is the not? What's the green, not the turquoise?
Man, if I was you, I'd look up. We were watching deer last night, and I know for a fact like bitter brush is one of the. You look it up. It's called antelope bitter brush. Is one of the highest used forage. I guess highest used piece of forage for deer. I don't know how I use that better, but and that's kind of like just in general. Right now, the sumac around here is, and Jess pointed this out to me. My girlfriend Jess pointed out that sumac is what they're eating on a lot right now. Which is more of that bright green. And then I know it like develops like a waxy outer coating. I think it loses a lot of nutrients later on in the year. So bitter brush is what I've always looked at. And it seems to be a pretty consistent producer as to like what kind of attracts them. Later in the year, and all the bitterbrush leaves fall off and stuff, they will just munch on sagebrush. So in that area, that doesn't help you much because sagebrush is everywhere.
Yeah.
But it is something that's good to know. For the most part, these deer are going to feed on stuff that you consider weeds in your backyard. So a lot of forbs is their main source of diet.
Gotcha. That once I saw the difference between the bitter brush now and the sagebrush, it just totally made sense. It looked all just kind of, you see the color for the first time, and the spot that I looked at looked good, and there was a water source, and so just figured, hey man, this is just like where Remy Warren gets his bucks, and so it's going to happen. But then, there was none of the bitter brush, so that makes sense.
It's a difference. The one thing that is also good to know is, like, at some level, there's only so much information that you can have going into a season, and then you need to study the deer themselves to figure out where they're at in that particular area. Jess and I have been discussing, so near here, deer will be in the middle of just like straight sagebrush and bitterbrush, just not really flats, but hillsides. Like, there doesn't necessarily need to be aspen pockets or timber pockets or stuff like that. Where back home, like, I had only kind of keyed in on those areas where there was a lot of cover. Mm-hmm. And, I'm not sure if that was because I keyed in on those areas because I was rifle hunting like earlier on in my hunting career, or if it was just like what I was told. And maybe there were deer out in the middle of the sagebrush, but it is something to consider. You're going to gather more information. And as I found with Jess, I would be like, okay, in the mornings, I'm going to glass the shade, and I'll be glassing the shade, and she's like, hey, turn around. And I turn around, and there's a deer out in the middle of the sun.
Is that the one that did you post that?
I don't think so. Not
you did post a picture of a deer right behind you, right?
I did. Actually, that is a prime example of that exact phenomenon. I was like, hey, I'll glass into the shade as the sun goes down. And then my buddy's like, hey, turn around. And I look behind me. There's a doe standing behind me as I'm looking the opposite direction.
Yeah.
In that case in particular, though, the brush behind me was really thick. I wasn't going to see anything in there. So,
yeah.
Anyway.
Another thing you talk about looking at the patterns. When we went to this last summer, we scouted the area where she drew, and there happened to be an area where you could fish. And so pretty close. And so we used that as we were going to go fish and then also go scout. And so in the scouting, found in kind of an aspen grove, found a bunch of scrapes, right? We call them rubs up there. I think we talked about this before. What do you call it?
It's probably interchangeable, man. I wouldn't worry about it.
Well, I don't want to sound like one of those out-of-staters, roll up, oh, I found a rub. Like, what are you talking about, guy? So because we found the rubs, I figured, hey, this is going to be a great spot. And then when we hunted it, because it had the what ended up being sagebrush, and then had the aspen grove. And so I figured this is going to be an awesome spot. So that's where we went. But it ended up being, because the weather was so warm, they hadn't really moved down to that winter range. And it ended up being that was kind of the winter range area of that. So we saw one white-tailed doe, and that was it. And then we were driving later on that week at a higher elevation, then we saw a pretty nice mule deer buck as we were driving out at night. But it was like 2,000 foot elevation change. So how much is elevation going to play and weather going to play? You mentioned that before, but even if it is pre-snow, like, what type of weather variables are we looking at here?
So I think there's a lot of folks out there, and it's probably a worthy thing to do, right? Like, I'm not knocking this approach, but a lot of folks will go and try to time the elevation and get the transition zone as they come down off the mountain. The area you're going to, that high country is pretty small in the first place. But a lot of people are trying to time this transition zone when the snow starts pushing deer down. And I think I've come to the conclusion that I'm going to study the low country, find out where deer are in the low country, and make a play on low country deer, knowing that as snow happens and as weather moves in, there aren't going to be fewer down low. They're not going uphill. So in this area that you're talking about, that's probably what I would do.
Makes sense.
As far as my Colorado hunt goes, it is a highly migratory area. And I was having a big discussion about this whole thing yesterday on a podcast for my Muley Monday. And it was like, there's not going to be fewer down low. So it's probably going to be where I start.
Nice.
If you had like an early archery season when you knew there was not going to be snow pushing things down, then I'm like, well, yeah, go high where you'll find bucks in the alpine or whatever. But in this case, I wouldn't worry about it. You're probably going to get some snow. Last year, about this time that you're going out, it was negative 11 degrees in Laramie. So bring your jacket.
Yeah. Well, that was, I wanted the archery. I wanted the archery elk because that just looked so much fun, just awesome to stalk them, and the weather's going to be better. But then with the start of school, being what it's going to be, and we're going to be partially in school, partially not. And teachers have to be back a little bit earlier so we can figure this stuff out. Then we have a week-long orientation with the kids about the protocols for getting into the school and everything. And I just felt, man, it would be really tough to, take my contractually given week off all at the same time, third week of school, right? So just as we're getting back in because of the carnage that COVID has done to the school schedule, I just felt kind of greasy to just get kind of rolling and bail for a week. People have said, hey man, you've earned the reputation. Kids know where your heart is. You've done the, they have respect of the school and the community and whatnot, but you just still feel just feels weird going off on a hunt.
You've got more years, man. Just pointed this out to me. I was doing the whole thing where I overthink and am like, well, I just want to shoot a deer like away from a road this year. Like, wow, getting all grumpy. And she's like, well, you have more years to do that if you would like to, or to not do that if you'd like not to, and you've got time. There's more than one hunting season. As long as the corona doesn't get you.
Yeah, dude, that's the crazy thing, right? You're supposed to like live life, and then like, whoa, well, how do we want, how do we want to do this here? But yeah, it's weird, man. It's weird, but I'm excited to hopefully, if I draw that, come down in October, and see if we can make something happen. But so, what's going on in Lander? And if you were to make a pitch for Abby and I heading out that way in the next couple of weeks, what's going on?
Well, the High Lakes just opened up last week. I went out, or 2 weekends ago now, and I went out and I caught 3 fish in an afternoon of fishing, which for me is a miracle.
Were you fly fishing or were you using spinning gear?
So I would say there's some fishing going on up in the higher elevations. Oh yeah, number 6, Panther Martins.
Nice.
Yeah.
Dude, you're next to some really nice water. You should pick up fly fishing.
I have a fly rod and some flies and stuff. It's just like I'm not as proficient with it yet or comfortable with it yet. So I'm like, I just want to catch something.
You got to leave the spinning gear at home. That's the key. When I didn't start fly fishing until maybe mid to late 20s. And when I'd come home to Alaska, that's like the place that you would absolutely want to fly fish because there's a ton of fish around. But I wanted to catch fish, and so I'd take the spinning rod. And it wasn't until you got to leave the spinning rod at home, right? This is Alaska. This is where you really get good at catching fish on the fly rod because you're more often than not going to actually catch something. So you can improve when you're going to have success. And so I finally did, and then it was great. And then, you become proficient. And it's just the little things that go into it. All that stupid, corny, cheesy, poetic, but kind of pretentious sounding things about fly fishing ends up being true. But, watching a fish come up from the depths with its mouth open, try to take your dry fly, that's something. Well,
get out here and teach me how to do it. I'm down.
Okay. Oh, that sounds good. You got, how far are you from Du Bois? Is it Du Bois? Du Bois?
It's it bucks the French spelling. It's Du Bois.
Du Bois.
Yeah.
I've heard and I'd seen some videos on the old YouTube that the Wind River can be pretty sweet in some of those areas where you can get access, because I know there's a lot of stuff around there. But yeah, I think I would like to get up there. And when we do. We'd also talked about heading up into and doing a backpacking into the Wind River range and try to do some lake fishing for some goldens.
Oh yeah, I'd totally try that if I was you. That's something I really like. The rivers out here are pretty blown up right still.
Yeah.
And if you go out to DuBois, bring your bear spray. That's where the guy just got attacked 2 weeks ago or 3 weeks ago now while he was shed hunting. So this end of the winds right here, there's not hardly any bears. There's a couple I think they have collared in the greater vicinity. But yeah, if you go up there to DuBois, just bring your bear spray.
Okay. Yeah. Well, we'll let you know for sure when we're heading up, because I'm pretty sure it's going to be a done deal, just a matter of when. So we'll want to get up there. But, awesome, man! Thanks again for being on here and helping a guy out.
Yeah, you bet. I always appreciate talking with you though, and like I said, I do this whether we record it or not. So anytime, man, I'm around and available.
Hey, but we're on the Zoom here. That behind you there at Whitetail. Right on my right, your left. Good. And what's on the other side?
That's my first. So I've got my whitetail and my first mule deer. I shot those back on the farm. We did like deer drives with those to get those. So it was good. And then I just got my bull hung up from last year. And I've got my archery buck, my archery mule deer, which is a nice little 3. Nice. I've got my bear skulls in here. I've got one more. This year's is knees whitened up. And then lastly, I've got my little pronghorn.
Perfect. It's a great office, man.
Yeah, thanks. It's got her all settled up.
Yeah. Step number 1, get the heads on the wall, right?
Yeah, exactly. I was like, what do you mean we need decorations other than skulls? I think this works great.
I have some of mine up on the walls too. And it's so unique, but none of them are huge, right? There's one 3x3 that's nice, but there are people who only put 4x4 bucks, around and up. It's like, well, I haven't really gotten into a whole lot of that before, but there's a story for each one of these. And so it's just being happy with, you walk in, it doesn't look like a lodge or some sort of like a Cabela's or anything like that, but you got that memory and you remember that. And it's cool to have that reminder.
Oh yeah, I just had this conversation. Someone from Wyoming came in and was like, "Dude, we need to upgrade your pronghorn." And I was like, "Hey now, like I shot that thing with my bow. It was my first pronghorn. Like, come on." And then you'd launch in the story,
When Abby and I were driving up here, I said, "Oh, there's a nice buck," and she said, "How do you know?" I said, "Well, I don't. It just it looks like a nice antelope.
It looks nice.
And it's nice before you know any better." Especially things like antelope. When I was on a mountain goat hunt a couple years ago, they're looking through the spotting scope and they're looking at, okay, is that, it's got to be above 10 inches because it's world-class genes there. And I'm thinking, dude, how can you tell from 400, 500 yards the difference between a goat with 9-inch horns and 10 versus 10 and a half, and then the bases? Dude, this is crazy. But if you know what to look for, then I don't know, man.
Yeah, no kidding. All right. Well, I better get myself back to work. Thanks again for hitting me up for the call. Yeah, anytime. I'm around.
Sweet. Later.